Welcome to A Ride on the Outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Zain, 60th episode, 6-0. Can you believe we have gotten here?
No, I can, and I can't believe we only have 40 more weeks until episode 100. Can you believe that?
No, I absolutely can't. And Zain, can you believe we're already in November? We're coming closer to the end of the year, coming closer to the wrap-up of another crazy, wild year in mixed martial arts. So welcome to episode 60 of the MMA Outsiders. To my left right here is Zain Bando. I'm Tom Albano, as always, here with the MMA Outsiders. Make sure you hit that like button, make sure to subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network, including every episode of the MMA Outsiders. Make sure to follow us across social media pages at MMA Outsiders ETB on Facebook, X, Instagram, and make sure to follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETB Network. To my left, as I mentioned, is my longtime co-host Zain Bando. You can find his work over at bjpen.com. You can see him as the writer, one of the newest Sunday writers for MMA Knockout through Fan Nation. And you can find his work over at, you can follow him on social media, at ZainBando99. And Zain is also a member of the Bellator Rankings Committee, which Bellator, we got a very big card coming up next weekend, which we'll preview next week. Zain, you'll be live there in Chicago for Bellator 301. But again, that's next week. Obviously, we have a different card to talk about this week. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tom Albano. You can find my work over at Fansided MMA. You can also find my work over with the PFL website. You know, we got the PFL championships coming up later this month, Zain. And then next month, PFL Europe has its championship card. So I will be there for both of those, covering, live and updating the websites for all that stuff. And you can follow me on social media at Thomas J. Albano. Also, don't forget, those of you who want to take the MMA Outsiders on the road with you, you can find our show on Acast and other audio-only platforms. And those of you who are listening on audio-only, make sure to come to our base, our home, youtube.com/ETB Network. Sandy ETB Network closing in on 600 subscribers. It's kind of crazy. Also, don't forget to go to etbpodcast.com for more information about the network and some blogs from some of our fellow contributors. So, Zain, obviously I mentioned Chicago next week for Bellator, but it's time for my neck of the woods this week. In the NYC, in the Big Apple, UFC 295. Now, granted, I'm not as excited for this card as I once was when Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic are on here. But we got a lot of talent. We got 2 title fights. And, hey, UFC, I'll give you some help. You can promote that you're going to have 2 new champions because technically you are.
And I guess you could say that you're less excited about it because with Jon Jones off the card, it'd be less enticing to go, plus the jack ticket prices. So pretty much the UFC is pretty much batting at 0 in your book. Is that correct?
I guess so, but kind of like what you said before we started recording, Zain, I guess I can start to prepare now for the possibility that I can be there for UFC, whatever it is in a year's time, 307, 308, 312, whatever it's going to be.
That's true.
All right. Let's talk about UFC 295. Obviously, a lot of chatter with the UFC. We will talk about the Dana White's announcements and the start of 2024 because we are obsessed with playing Schedule Maker on this show. But that'll be for later. But for right now, Zain, let's talk about this weekend's card. Obviously, no Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. We mentioned that last week. So now, stepping into the place elevated from originally scheduled co-main event to main event, Zain, a new light heavyweight champion will be crowned on this night as the former champion Yuri Prohaska takes on the former middleweight champion and the newest inductee into the Glory Kickboxing Hall of Fame, Alex Pereira.
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about pure violence. This is the definition of if this fight isn't exciting, I'll be very disappointed. Let me just say this right off the jump. if you would have told me that Alex Pereira would be fighting for the UFC light heavyweight title after being viciously knocked out by Israel Adesanya back in Miami earlier this year, I don't know if I would have believed it. But I just think this is one of those things where MMA is such a crazy sport and the stars align in mysterious ways. And this is one of those fights, and I just see an all-action-packed kickboxing slugfest in these two. And I think whoever's the first to fall is going to win the fight. And this has been a coin flip fight for me for about a week and a half or so. But I'm going to stick on the side of experience. I'm going to stick on the side of someone who looked like he was about to go on a major championship run before his injury. Give me Yuri Prohaska in the second round to win by TKO, and what will be an action-packed first round that will see Pereira drop Prohaska, and Prohaska will have to overcome some adversity, very similar to the Glover-Teixeira fight back in Singapore about a year and a half or so ago, and have it be one of the best light heavyweight title fights that we've seen. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I think this is a chance to be the best UFC light heavyweight title fight, arguably since John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson won all the way back at UFC 165 in Toronto. I feel like the vibes for this fight are so high. I think this is a hardcore delight, and I think for those of you who have never seen either of these two fight before, you're in for a massive treat on Saturday night if you plan to stay home and tune into the event.
I mean, Zain, that's some high expectations for this fight. But you know what? In all fairness, for those of you who have been hoping for John Jones, Stipe Miocic, waiting patiently and have to wait even more patiently, combined with the facts, Zain, you talked about these jacked up ticket prices that were there for the MSG card, including, you mentioned right before we went on the air, the largest, most expensive ticket price for a UFC card in history. And Zain, I think back to also we talked about it for weeks and months ago, the $600, $700, $900 nosebleed tickets. For those people, this is going to need to be a fight of the year kind of candidate. And you're right, Zain. If this has the potential to be such a nominee, it's definitely going to be, I think, a violent affair. We have seen Yuri Prohaska and his striking ability. We have seen, his traditional martial arts mixed in with the violence that is produced within the MMA realm. And we've seen him be crazy. We've seen him be entertaining. And he is a very experienced fighter. But so too, Zain, is Alex Pereira. We talk about champs here in mixed martial arts. But we mentioned Glory Kickboxing. The only champ over there. Former Glory middleweight champion, former interim light heavyweight champion in Glory, former light heavyweight champion in Glory. And Zain, it's crazy to think that 1 year ago, we were sitting here, Alex Pereira was about to have his first UFC main event in Madison Square Garden as he was taking on Israel Adesanya. And it was 1 year ago I sat here and I praised Alex Pereira to all end, and you told me I was crazy. And I almost looked crazy for 4 rounds until Alex Pereira delivered one of the greatest comebacks in UFC history, which I think was absolutely crazy that we had, again, sitting here and reflecting, Zain. Sorry to go a little off topic, but, that year we had Leon Edwards' crazy comeback over Kamaru Usman, and then we had Alex Pereira's crazy comeback of Israel Adesanya. So Alex Pereira's been here before under the big lights, namely the big lights of MSG.
Yeah, and we also had Yuri Prohaska's crazy comeback against Teixeira.
That's true too. And you mentioned Teixeira, by the way. Alex Pereira has openly stated one of his motivations for this fight is to deliver the championship back to Glover Teixeira. Obviously, Glover Teixeira now retired, but a training partner and trainer of Alex Pereira. So it would be something. It would be a magical moment if Alex Pereira was able to deliver that championship back. However, Zain, I'm going to be in agreement with you. I think that Yuri Prohaska's style might be a little too awkward for Pereira. I think they're both going to deliver some violent shots. I think both men will get rocked at one point or another. I don't think anyone's going to get, knocked out in the first round because I think both these guys have too tough of chins and too tough of skin to, drop in that sort of fashion. However, like I said, I think Jiri style is definitely something that Pereira might have a little bit of a hard time with. And I think Jiri might have just a little more power than Pereira. And, I mean, Pereira looked good and, looked decent at least when he was taking on Jan Blachowicz in his first light heavyweight fight. And I just don't know if the Jan to Jiri jump. Obviously, Jan's a former champ himself, but I think Jiri is just... compared to Jan Blachowicz, I think Jiri's just a little more talented. I say a little. He's a little more talented.
Well said. So I guess that leads me to a follow-up question, and that's exactly this. Do you think that ring rust will play a factor in this fight, considering the last time that Prochazka competed was June of 2022?
It could, but Sam, we are also considering that we have seen Alex Pereira defeated before. We talked about that Israel Adesanya knockout that he suffered. Jiri, and plays into his motivation. He never lost the championship.
No, he didn't.
He was one of those fighters that was cursed and was injured last year. I remember us sitting here, one of our first breaking news stories as the MMA Outsiders, when Jiri suffered his injury and vacated the championship, which is kind of disappointing because, like you alluded to, Zain, I thought that Jiri was going to have, it was going to be sort of an era. Now I sit here and I kind of sound like Joe Rogan when he said, "Welcome to the Machida era."
For sure. So I guess that's also well said. So if you're Jamal Hill, who would you rather fight next? Because you know that unless something drastic happens, he in my estimation and according to the rankings, it very much looks like
it would be him. You're right.
He would be penciled in to regain his UFC light heavyweight championship. Who would you rather see him fight, and what do you think is the better stylistic matchup?
The better stylistic matchup. I'm going to save the better stylistic matchup. I'm going to tell you what I want to see first. Okay. What I want to see is Jiri Prochazka versus Jamal Hill. The battle of the two men who never lost their championship in the octagon. The battle of the two men who both would have had to overcome injury. I think that's a true undisputed title fight.
So, are you going to make my dreams come true? And it's going to be Jiri Prochazka versus Jamal Hill, UFC 302 in the main event in Chicago on June 8th.
It all stems back to Chicago now, doesn't it? Go tell Dana you want it in Chicago.
No kidding. But do you not agree that would be the perfect fight to bring the UFC back to Chicago for the first time in 5 years?
Do I think so? Absolutely. Now, stylistically, here's my question, Zain. I mean,
okay,
because I'm sitting here thinking, because we should have seen Alex Pereira take on somebody with great grappling experience, and then Sean Strickland decided to be a genius and try to outstrike Alex Pereira. To this day, I still have no idea what he was thinking.
I don't think I can say this with certainty. I think 100% of the MMA community had no idea what he was thinking.
So by that logic, stylistically, you would have to say Jiri. But again, I'm curious because we haven't seen Alex Pereira really tested with a true, championship level grappler like Jamal Hill. Say I can't even count that Strickland fight. So I'm wondering what that Pereira Hill matchup would do for somebody like Hill. Would that be too much for Pereira to overcome?
Well, I think Pereira versus Hill, if you look at it that way, I think Pereira versus Hill would be a pure striking match. That's what I think. And I think if Prochazka fought Hill, I think Prochazka would want to avoid Hill's power and try to take him down and out wrestle him for 25 minutes. And
that's why, though, Zan, the Prohaska Hill fight seems a little more like that. I want that. They both have power. They both are, I don't want to say evenly skilled. I think Prohaska is a little more, but that's a tit for tat matchup.
For sure. So I guess in terms of star power, this is kind of off the topic of this fight. But do you think if Alex Pereira wins the UFC light heavyweight championship, are we now getting into a discussion where we have to debate whose legacy is better? Is Pereira Adesanya, or are we not there yet?
I don't know. I don't necessarily know if we're there yet. I don't know if we can be there, Zan, until we know what Israel Adesanya's fate is. He's claiming, as you know, we talked about the last couple of weeks, he's claiming he's not fighting again until 2027, and I highly doubt that.
I doubt that too, because you alluded to it last week. If he was throwing a truck of cash, and it
for
was
a fill-in fight,
and we're gonna get to this later, but if a certain someone wins the middleweight title, you know he would want in on that. So
yeah, fair enough. But to sum things up, Zan, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to give it an extra round, though. I'm going to give Pereira his due, so I'm going to give an extra round. You say second round knockout. I'm going to go with a third round knockout. Jiri Prohaska regains his title.
If this fight goes the distance, who wins, in your opinion?
I'm tempted to say Pereira.
Really?
I feel like Pereira might be able to. Yeah, I mean, you talked about ring rust, San. We've seen Pereira go the distance. I'm concerned about what, if Prohaska will tire himself out trying to go for a finish. We've seen Pereira pull off a stunning comeback in a fifth round.
That's true.
I'm tempted to lean Pereira if this one goes the distance.
Are you tempted to lean Pereira by a very controversial split decision, or are you attempted to go that far? Is there going to be another curse of the heavyweight championship on Saturday or something weird like that, or no?
I pray not, Zan. But there's something else we have to consider.
Okay.
This is New York.
Okay.
How much crap have we seen go on in these New York cards?
For the last 6 years, I would say a lot of different things.
And you combine that with the light heavyweight title curse. What's not to say that this fight's going to be cursed somewhat?
I think it will be.
So you know what? I see it. If this fight goes the distance, we're getting a controversial decision.
And if it and I hate to put it in your head, but I have to do it because I can be evil in that sort of way. If this fight goes to a draw, what does the UFC do?
You know what Dana's gonna do? He's gonna say, "No, f this." Jan Blachowicz versus Jamal Hill at UFC, whatever.
Literally,
he will do something like that, or he'll wave a bunch of money in Glover's face and say, "Are you sure retirement's fine?"
Yeah, and then maybe he'll do something dumb. Instead of putting that fight on a pay-per-view, he's gonna put it on a random UFC fight night card instead.
Unless he waves that money in front of Adesanya. Hey, you want to try 205 again for a rematch with Pereira? Here's all this money.
Yeah, you never know. But in all seriousness, assuming we don't get to that point, we are on the same page. Pereira you're saying third round TKO. I'll take the second round. But I could see either. I would say my best bet or my best play that I would go with is over under 2.5 rounds. If you can get this fight at 2.5 rounds, I would do it.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Dan, there's something else we need to consider. Where does Kevin Lee fit into all this?
It's a good one. Considering that it's Madison Square Garden, that's even funnier.
I'll never forget that knockout of Gregor Gillespie.
That's true. It's one of the greatest knockouts in UFC history that nobody remembers.
I was about to run out of the media day, and he was like Kevin Lee was like the last person I got, and I got that story up, and the knockout happened. Magic.
That's wild.
I love it. And speaking of what I love, Zan, so we're going to get heavyweights. It's just not the heavyweights we thought we were going to get. We're going to have an interim championship. Yes, they are still going to make Jones Miocic. Yes, we are going to have two heavyweight champions for some time. One heavyweight champion in the Jones Miocic world, and then one in the world of everybody else. Interim title on the line in the co-main event. Sergey Pavlovich, Zan, we have talked about for a time of where he fits in the title picture alongside John Jones and Stipe. But his opponent, Zan, is a heavyweight on the rise. A heavyweight that has been on the rise and now finally gets the chance to get his due. England's own Tom Aspinall.
Well, yeah, there's history-making implications in this fight, too, because if Aspinall wins, he's the first ever UFC heavyweight champion from the UK. And correct me if I'm wrong, isn't Sergey Pavlovich from Poland? Does that sound right, or is he from Croatia?
I am going to double check that because I want to make sure I get that information correct. Now, Zan, would it also mean that if we were talking about Aspinall, would he be the second? Oh, pardon me, the third British champion in UFC history? Because Michael Bisping, Leon,
and
then
now,
him,
and now Aspinall, yeah.
So it would be then. Let's see. He was actually born in Russia, Sergey Pavlovich.
Okay, so he would be the first Russian UFC heavyweight champion, technically, then.
Yes. So let's talk about it. I mean, Sergey, Zan, like we kind of alluded to, I mean, he definitely has the kind of resume and ranking where we were saying, well, you have to consider him within this picture. He is ranked, I believe, number 2 in the heavyweight rankings, coming off wins and I should say finishes. You know, a whole string of first-round finishes. He lost to Alistair Overeem at the end of 2018, and ever since then, that was his only loss. And ever since then, Zan, actually, that was also his UFC debut. Okay, and ever since then, Zan, let me try that one more time. He has been unstoppable. Marcelo Gom, Maurice Green, Shamil Abdurakhimov, Derek Lewis, Tai Tuivasa, Curtis Blades.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty impressive resume considering the last 3 guys that he defeated have been in the heavyweight title picture for quite some time. So that's a solid resume for him. And, you know, you look at what Aspinall has had to overcome in the last year, especially with his, I think it was his knee injury, from what I recall, in that fight in London, which did not play well into his favor. His last fight was, to me, his best performance that he's ever had in the UFC. What did you think?
You're talking about the win over Tybura, right?
Yep, that's correct.
I mean, when you beat somebody in under 90 seconds in the fashion that he did, little tough to not be impressed.
No, very, very well said. And, you know, this to me, this is going to be really old for those of you guys who have been following this for forever, but this is giving me Frank Mir Nogueira vibes pretty badly, just because if you think about it, even though there's no tie to, in this case, John Jones, I just think it's almost like you're in the middle of a 4-man tournament and you don't know.
Well,
no matter what I mean to say is, even though this is informally a tournament, it was like it's a bit of a 4-man tournament, and no matter what the final ends up being, it's gonna be spectacular.
For sure. And Zan, sorry to interrupt, but I had mentioned last week that this is giving the vibes of when Randy Couture tried to get out of his UFC contract as the heavyweight champion. And on one end of the spectrum, you had Randy Couture versus Brock Lesnar that ended up playing out, but then you also had an interim title fight between Mir and Nogueira, which ultimately led us to the Lesnar-Mir 2 bout that headlined UFC 100.
Yep.
So, I mean, we're talking about history with the UFC. We're talking about parallels. You're damn right this sounds like that kind of parallel. I'm just wondering, Zan, considering the amount of time that Jones is going to be out for, and the more of Miocic waiting, because we've talked about Miocic playing the waiting game and how it's paid off for him, but the fact would be that fight would happen in mid to late 2024, and it would be over 3 years since we had seen Miocic. Do you see the UFC? My question: do you see the UFC still having the interim heavyweight championship defended over the course of the year until this Jones Miocic fight can get made?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the winner of this fight is going to have to either defend their interim heavyweight title at UFC 299 in the main event or take part in UFC 300 as one of the 3 title fights.
We'll talk about UFC 299 because I think the UFC 300 is the more logical answer. But Zain, basically, this means that as much as it's an interim heavyweight title, only for the sake of Jones and Miocic, until otherwise, right now this is the de facto heavyweight championship.
Yeah, it is, and not only is it the de facto heavyweight championship, it's the heavyweight championship where whoever wins, it's a new era. It's a new era. I mean, what more can you say? We've said it for months. Whoever wins the Jones Miocic fight, there's no guarantees that either of those guys are going to stick around. Do you really think that John Jones wants to fight one of these 2 studs and end his UFC career on a loss? I don't think so, because it's a very realistic possibility that if either of these 2 guys fights Jones, it could be Jones's toughest test of his entire MMA career. And this is no disrespect to any of the other fighters that he's fought, but these 2 guys, the way that they've been knocking everybody out the last few years, they're gonna be a problem. So
and Zain, we have also talked about at least heading into 295 originally when it was booked as the main event. Who knows? Maybe Jones said, fights Miocic and then calls it a day. Miocic, maybe he calls it a day. There was a chance, Sam. We said both these guys could fight their hearts out, and whoever wins, regardless, both men could have retired then and there.
Yeah, but I also think, though, if Stipe beats Jones, there's no way you don't do that again.
Yeah, you're right. There probably would be some sort of rematch, but I think Zain plays into it more that this was a de facto championship. Basically, it is the like I kind of alluded. Jones and Miocic are in their own little world, and then you've got the rest. You got the rest of the crew, which Pavlovich and Aspinall are fighting over.
Could you see if Aspinall wins this fight, he headlines in the UK to defend his interim heavyweight title?
Absolutely. Dana would try to make that for some point during the summer. Aspinall defending the heavyweight title, interim heavyweight title.
And could you see the same for Pavlovich, where if he wins, they bring a
Russia card?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I could see it. We haven't really had anybody defend a pay-per-view in Russia. I know that's been something Dana has been really pushing for. I know when Khabib was around, that was a big mission, and then Khabib retired. Obviously, the UFC, anytime we've had anything Dagestani related to Islam Makhachev, it's always been and Khabib, it's always been in Abu Dhabi. Right. And now you've got the Saudi Arabia card, which is the first Saudi Arabia card in March. So maybe depending on when this Jones Miocic fight gets booked, if Pavlovich wins this fight, perhaps he makes it the title defense early in the UFC 290s or the UFC 300, and then turns around and defends the interim title again in October. Next October in the Abu Dhabi pay-per-view card slot.
Well, I just did the math, and if Jones is out 8 months, that means he's not coming back until June or July of 24.
Well, I know that's the rumor is that it probably could be International Fight Week, Jones Miocic.
But if international, oh yeah, I keep mixing up International Fight Week and 300 because I always think of the poses together. But
because 200 was that way, and we thought 300 could be that way too. But
right, so
money talks.
Yeah, I mean, do you think the UFC is hoping they could pencil in Jones Miocic for AFW? Do you think that's what they're thinking, or what the hope is?
I think so. I think that's the hope.
So, could you see a scenario where Jones Miocic happens in July, and and Sergey defends the interim title in England in like August or something? Could you see that? And then
I could see that way too. Only Zan for the sake of, all right, we get the real heavyweight title settled away. We get this de facto title situation settled away. We've got these two who come out on top. Let's do the fight. Let's get one heavyweight champion again.
It's a good point. So back to this fight at hand. It's obviously a very, very coin flip type of a fight. What do you see from both of these guys that makes you think is going to pose trouble? Because for me, I think that leg kicks could play a factor in this fight, and I think that Sergey's kickboxing could very well dictate the pace, at least early. But I also think that as the fight goes into the later rounds, I think that Aspinall's gas tank will be able to hold up a little bit more. What do you think? What do you think of this fight?
Zen, it's kind of like with when we talk about the light heavyweight title fight. I think if the longer that this fight goes, the more it plays into Tom Aspinall's hand. That said, it's going to be quite a test to deal with Sergey Pavlovich's power. If, as you kind of alluded to when we talk about Tom Aspinall's knee injury, if Sergey is going to target that knee and deliver a whole bunch of leg kicks,
I think he might.
I can see that happening as well. But if Tom Aspinall, I know he's got some great ground game, great jiu-jitsu game. I think, Zan, that this is going to be a pure striker versus, I think Tom Aspinall, he'll strike, but I think he's going to use his wrestling and his jiu-jitsu skills and ground skills, to the max here. I think that's the strategy he has to go with. So I think in a dream scenario, this would be a striker versus grappler kind of matchup. If Tom Aspinall can get this fight to the ground and keep it on the ground for as long as possible, I think he's going away with the interim heavyweight title.
I think so too, and that leads me to my prediction. I'm going to say Aspinall 4th round TKO. He mounts a gas Pavlovich late and finishes him with a ground and pound. What do you think?
Would I be unpopular if I say Aspinall got a decision?
That would be a very unpopular pick, but I could easily see that as well.
I want to say Aspinall. I want to say Aspinall by decision, but you throwing it out there that Pavlovich could be gassed, considering that he hasn't gotten out of the first round in his entire UFC career.
That's the whole reason why I think he's going to struggle as the fight goes past round 2. That's the reason.
I agree with, and you know what, Zan? I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to say Aspinall. I might go one round earlier. I might go 3rd round on this one too. 3rd round TKO.
Okay.
I see 4th round too. I could see 4th round too. I'm just worried. It depends on how much energy Pavlovich uses in this fight. Has he trained himself enough for 25 minutes?
It's a good question. I just think the earlier this fight is, the better it favors Pavlovich.
Zan, sorry, one more thing, but it's one more thing that's important that we need to consider. Both these guys are coming in on short notice. Neither of these guys were booked for this card. Once John Jones went down, they both got the call.
It's a good point. So it'll be who is more mentally and physically ready is going to be the guy that wins the fight. And
both these guys on who had the better camp in short term.
Yeah, and it's going to determine too, like who was training even before they knew that they were fighting against one another. That could also play a factor too.
Yeah, very true.
And I also think that gas tank will be a major reason why the fight goes one way or another. But I just think Aspinall has been destined to win the heavyweight title for years now. And I'm not saying Sergey can't do it. He'll probably win it eventually. But given these circumstances, I just don't think it's his personal.
Zan, I 100% agree. I think all the momentum right now in terms of heavyweight, momentum and trajectory, even though Aspinall is beneath Pavlovich in the rankings, I think Aspinall has the momentum.
I think so too. So with that being said, with what we know about Jones and Miocic, do you think Aspinall fights the winner next, or do you think he'll be staring across from somebody else entirely different that we're not considering, given what's going on? What do you think?
What I could see, Zan, hear me out on this one.
Okay.
I could definitely see, considering the circumstance of how long Jones and Miocic could be out and how the UFC wants to play the waiting game on those two. I can definitely see Dana White not wanting to waste any time booking Tom Aspinall for a UK card, unless he books him in Vegas in April as a third potential headline or title fight for that card. But I could definitely see something where you've got Tom Aspinall in the UK as a main eventer. Then, a little unpopular considering that he's already had a couple of chances and is a former interim champ himself. But you think of Europe and you think of the countries around there. Francis Cyril Gane is still there at the top, towards the top of the heavyweight rankings.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. And
you don't think the European MMA fans would be very attracted to an Aspinall Gane matchup for an interim heavy or de facto heavyweight title?
Oh, they would flip out.
They would eat that up.
That would be the biggest heavyweight fight in European MMA history, period.
For sure.
Yeah, that would do massive numbers, and that would make a potential Jones or Jones Gane rematch huge. It can be Miocic Gane huge. Whatever the UFC decides to do for the heavyweight division, despite all the problems that they have at the moment, actually looking at it from a stylistic perspective, they actually have more good problems to have, which is rare in a case like this, in my opinion.
For sure. All right, Zain, let's have a look at the rest of the main card. We go to Jessica Andrade versus Mackenzie Dern, and Zain, it's been a tough road for Jessica Andrade. So it doesn't feel like it's been that long since she's last competed.
What's her record since she lost the title?
I'm going to look that up right now. She beat Lauren. Let's see. So ever since she lost the title to Weili Zhang, she dropped the split decision to Rose, defeated Chukagian, lost her title shot against Shevchenko, racked up 3 wins against Calvillo, Lemos, and Murphy, and ever since then, submitted by Erin Blanchfield, knocked out brutally by Yang Zhenan, and then was submitted just back in August by Tatiana Suarez. And that included a move back to a permanent move back to strawweight after losing to Erin Blanchfield, which basically took her out of the flyweight, title picture. And Zain, I feel like Andrade is somebody who, kind of like Izzy, needs a little bit of a longer break.
Yeah, I think she needs a bit of a longer break too. And something we've failed to consider is I just feel like this is too quick of a turnaround. And given how well Mackenzie Dern's fought the last few years, this feels like a setup fight to me.
Oh, absolutely. This, Zain, you basically laid it down. This is absolutely a setup fight. Now, she is tough, and Mackenzie Dern is more of a grappling artist, so I'm not going to say that's going to be a first round, but Erin Blanchfield submitted her in the second. Tatiana Suarez submitted her in the second. I'm just going to go out and say Mackenzie Dern's getting it done in the second round via submission.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm going to see Mackenzie Dern by RNC. I don't know what round, though.
I definitely see it, and hopefully, Zain, at that point, Andrade kind of realizes she needs to, even if it's a year, take a year off at this point and get some refocusing and let her body rest and refocus and adjust her mind as to what could be next for her.
Yeah, or potentially think about switching weight classes yet again.
I mean, but Zain, that would also be 4 losses in a row, which would be brutal for her career.
Brutal, and then again, if she's not delivering fan-friendly fights, the UFC might have to think about shipping her around, because honestly, given the influx of talent that the PFL has, it'd actually be a perfect addition to one of their tournaments in the near future, just because of the amount of eyeballs she would bring to that promotion.
The problem is she's still ranked in the women's pound for pound rankings. I think she's ranked in both strawweight and flyweight still.
Yeah, it's interesting and something to consider for sure. And she's going to have to think, financially, is it smart for me to keep fighting this way, or do I have to change camps and think of another strategy to get back to my old championship form because she has not looked the same in the last several years. So,
yeah, no. Also, having a look at the rest of the main cards, and here's an interesting one that I have my eye on. Matt the Steamroller, one of my favorite nicknames. Matt the Steamroller Frivola taking on Benoit Saint Denis. This has fun fight written all over it.
yeah, so I've been wanting to ask you this. Do you believe the Benoit Saint Denis hype, or are you not buying it?
See, I don't know, Zain, if we can talk about that without talking about Matt Frivola's hype. I mean, he's coming off of a big victory, Zain. He knocked out Drew Dober in May.
Yeah, he didn't just knock him out, he viciously knocked him out.
So you've got a couple of guys, young guys at lightweight here, Zain, that could potentially, this could, whoever wins this fight, Zain, is going to be one of the last people in the lightweight rankings. I think Frivola is ranked 14 or 15 right now.
He's 14.
I think he is 14 as well. So, I mean, this is a case, Zain, where you got two hype trains. You're going to have an exciting fight. It's just going to be a matter of who's got more in it. And Zain, I'm going to lean to Frivola. One might be a little bit of New York bias, but the other reason, Zain, is I kind of like the competition that he's fought more. Because with Benoit Saint Denis, his 4 wins, he's got Nicholas Stoles, he's got Gabriel Miranda, Ismael Bonfim, which is a nice win, Thiago Moises, which is a decent win, Matt Frivola. He has losses, but those losses, Zain, are Arman Sarukian and Terrence McKinney. Those are not bad losses in my book, and his current win streak, as you mentioned, the Drew Dober knockout, and he viciously knocked out Atman Azayatar right before that. That was last year's Garden card.
Yeah, it's almost like he's destined to win in an MSG again, but I'm actually going to go on the opposite side of you and say that Benoit Saint Denis spoils the party. I think he figures Frivola out, and I think he catches him with something on the way in, and he wins in impressive fashion and good enough to win a performance bonus.
Ooh, interesting. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go with Frivola. I think this one goes the distance. Zain, I think this might be a fight of the night nominee. This might actually end up being my pick for fight of the night.
It's a solid pick for fight of the night. Either way, it's going to be action-packed, and it's quite surprising that this is not headlining the prelims because, in my opinion, it should be.
I was actually going to get the full card up here to double check what the prelims would look like, Zain. But before we get into that, we also do have the opening ballots of the main card on pay-per-view. It's going to be Diego Lopez taking on Pat Sabatini.
Yeah, I don't see how.
Actually, Zain, you give your take. I'll be right back.
Okay. So Tom comes right back. I have to save face and pick Pat Sabatini. And one of the reasons why I'm picking him is because somehow, some way, he still follows me on Instagram, and I don't want to lose that potential relationship. And of course, Pat Sabatini is fighting in New York. But when you know that Pat Sabatini is fighting in New York, good things are going to happen. And yes, Diego Lopez is a very exciting prospect, but usually Hold on.
I'm trying to get it. No, continue. I'm trying to get something.
Okay. I was just going to say, usually when Pat Sabatini fights in New York, good things are going to happen. And usually when you get these mega cards in these major cities, the locals show out. And I think it could very well be possible that Sabatini keeps the trend going.
All right. Oh, that's the wrong side. Let me switch it up over here. Zain, let's see.
Pat Sabatini, Rider University alumnus.
Do you think I am picking against my fellow Bronc?
No,
Hell no. Absolutely not. I am not picking against my fellow Bronc. I am not picking against somebody, Zain, who, he had that one injury during his run on the regional circuit. But other than that, Zain has been absolutely impressive. His only loss, Zain, in his last, ever since that injury, that's 5, 6, 7, 8 fights. He's 7-1 since then. His only loss came against Damon Jackson, which is not a bad loss in my book.
No.
And Zain, like you said, when he fights in New York, magical things can. Actually, he has never fought in New York. He's fought in New Jersey. He's fought in Atlantic City during his time.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
In the CES and the Cage Fury Fighting Championships, he's been, Zain, unfortunately, a staple of Apex.
That's true.
So he definitely, this is for him a really big stage.
But he's made it his house too.
That is true too. But this is his biggest stage ever since he was on the 261 card in Jacksonville, which was the first card with a live crowd after COVID. So this is a big opportunity. First time he's competing in his home in New York on a pay-per-view card. Zain, I think he shows up in a big way. Maybe this is a little bit of the biasness of Rider University talking in me. First round submission for Pat Sabatini.
Wow, that's bold. Okay.
First, no disrespect to Diego Lopez, but I think something magical is in the air. It's that crazy MSG feeling, Zain. That same crazy feeling that had me pick Alex Pereira last year.
I was going to go with Sabatini by decision, but I like that pick too.
Good. I'm glad. I'm going to actually double check, Zain, the UFC card because the wiki isn't exactly telling me a proper order. I don't know if they do have a proper. Okay, so.
Well, if you go on Tapology,
yeah, I see the order now. So, interestingly enough, Zain, they have Tabitha Ricci taking on Lupi Godinez, but that's the second to last prelim bout. They're going with, I understand he's 14th ranked at flyweight, but Steve Erceg taking on Alessandro Costa.
Yeah, that should be lower on the card, you would think, right?
I would think Ricci Godinez should be the prelim headliner.
That's what I would think too, but maybe it's to draw eyeballs in because Erceg is so exciting, and maybe because Erceg has never fought, and maybe because Erceg has never fought on that big of a stage before. That's probably why.
Meanwhile, Zain, on the Fight Pass or early prelims, the featured bout of that portion of the card, Jared Gordon versus Mark Madsen. I think I'm more excited for that fight than any of the TV prelims.
Yeah, considering how loyal Jared Gordon is to the East Coast and specifically Dana White, you would
and
think
how Marco Madsen in his Olympic style, caliber of wrestling.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
That's the Fight Pass headliners.
That's wild.
Absolutely bugging me. But Zain, we also have something very big this weekend. So we're at November 11th, this Veterans Day, this Saturday is UFC 295. The next day, Zain, is the actual 30th anniversary of the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to think. So for those of you who lived under a rock, November 12, 1993, this thing was created according to Bill Wallace, at least for the first 30 seconds of the UFC 1 broadcast. It was called the
Ultimate Fighting Challenge.
The Ultimate Fighting Challenge. And then, of course, we found out later that it was actually called the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And this thing,
and then he had a slip of the tongue while pronouncing McNichols Arena.
Yeah, that was funny. That was funny. Anyway, as I was saying, then this little thing was brought to American television called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which nobody never heard of. So, in case you guys don't know, of course, Place Gracie won the first UFC, and then of course he went on to win UFCs 3 and 4 before before the 90s rolled on and continued into what was nearly a bankrupt sport before, of course, Zuffa purchased it. And you guys know the whole story. But why they were mentioning this is because it was 30 years ago that the sport MMA was brought to homes all over the country and all over the world. You and I have followed MMA and combat sports for almost the same number of years. I started in July of 2006. You started with The Ultimate Fighter in 2005. Tom, what was your first memory watching MMA? And is there ever a point in time where you thought, "Oh, I'm going to I don't understand the sport. I think it's too violent," or did you always know that from your love of pro wrestling that you were going to love MMA just as much?
I think so. I think, Zain, having The Ultimate Fighter right after Monday Night Raw kind of like hooked me in and led me into everything. And I have said it before on maybe not our podcast, but on a different podcast that I appeared on, that when I saw that first Ultimate Fighter season, and I saw how crazy things could get, I'm like, this is a bit interesting. Obviously, around that time, Zain, 2005 was, reality TV was the thing. It was the mainstream, and it was taking over America like a chokehold. But then, Zain, like you said, I was originally a pro wrestling guy, and then you see, what's it called? You see that first Ultimate Fighter fight, and Bobby Southworth knocks his opponent out cold, and it's like, oh, this is something different. But kind of like what you were saying, Zain, my reaction that I didn't cower away. I was just like, oh, and like the gears were going in 10-year-old me, and I'm like, and I started just tuned in week after week after week, because the next week after Bobby Southworth, pulled us off that knockout after cutting 20 pounds in like the 2 days or something like that, which is unbelievable. The very next week, Zain, was my first experience of watching Diego Sanchez in the cage when he demonstrated a rear naked chokehold to win his fight.
Yeah, that's a pretty wild story that you remember vividly, who you watched and when you watched it. So I guess I can now give you my introduction into my favorite sport, which obviously is mixed martial arts. So my introduction into this crazy fisticuffs world was at 6 years old in a teddy bear chair, being sat down and accidentally, and my dad accidentally purchased UFC 61, which is Tito Ortiz versus Ken Shamrock 2. And I remember, I remember watching the promos thinking it was the coolest thing ever. And I don't know if you remember, you probably do, but for those of you who are newer fans of the sport, there was a time in UFC history that you could only buy the pay-per-view, and those were the only fights you got to see. You did not get the prelims. You didn't
Zain, sorry to interrupt. If you were lucky, and certain fights, there was a lot of fights that didn't go to distance, a lot of finishes. Maybe you'd get a prelim bout or two.
Yeah. Which I'm gonna continue this story now. So, I just remember he ordered the event, and I just think the promo's the coolest thing ever. And I just asked my dad, "When is it gonna start?" And he's like, "You see that countdown in the corner of the screen? That's when it's gonna start." And when I saw the Gladiator intro, may it rest in peace. It's now 11 years old. That thing is not graced my television screen, but I thought the intro was the coolest thing ever, and I thought specifically Ken Shamrock's entrance. I don't know what he walked out to, but whatever he walked out to, I thought was unbelievable. And I thought that the same. I was so young that I thought the same fighters competed on every single event. So I thought,
well, I mean, in fairness, the pro wrestlers compete on every single event.
Yes, that's what I kind of thought at first, and then I became hooked on it, watching Tito Ortiz versus Chuck Liddell 2 in a foyer in California, or in a foyer in Florida at a bar. That actually was sponsoring Mickey's Liquor at the time. But anyway, essentially, when Chuck won that fight, I was hooked on him because of the shorts he wore. I thought his shorts were the coolest thing ever. And then I'll never forget vividly watching him get knocked up at Rampage Jackson. And for the first time ever watching sports, I cried after he lost.
Aw.
I couldn't believe he had lost. That was my favorite fighter that got me hooked onto the UFC. And then when I went to my first live UFC event, I've been very lucky enough to go to 10 live UFC events. The first UFC event I ever went to was UFC 90, Anderson Silva versus Patrick Cote. The same night that I got to see the emergence of the eventual legend that was Junior Dos Santos, knocking out then ranked number 2 heavyweight in the world, Mauricio Verdum, and me thinking it was the craziest upset I'd ever seen, because obviously up until that point, Verdum was just smoking everybody. So there's no way Verdum loses that one. But I just miss when I was younger, like being all excited for like when the countdown shows would premiere and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, with the countdown show coming up, there's another UFC event, and then obviously the sport grew on me. But those early years of the heyday from like 2006 to 2013, it just felt like every single card got bigger and bigger and bigger. And just remembering the old promos and stuff, like once you start watching the sport, and for those of you who are even remotely considering watching it, for those of you who start watching the sport, it just grows. It just grows and grows and grows on you to the point where you basically get used to it. So that's my first couple of memories with the UFC, and then I think it all culminated for me being able to see Conor McGregor fight in Las Vegas in person. I'm like, I've been waiting for a Vegas show for years, so for me to say that I finally saw one in person, that was my UFC peak for my MMA fandom, if you will. And that's when I started to get introduced to other promotions like the WEC and Bellator, because I would figure out like, oh, there are these other promotions that compete with them, and they have these fighters and stuff. So once you just kind of get immune to it and remember like and the fights were, and that was back before social media, so I became obsessed with the Sure Dog forums and the underground, and I just thought the whole that whole era was just in boggling. What do you remember about the pre-social media MMA era before Twitter took over the world?
I just remember tuning into like all the fight night events on that would be air on Spike TV, which would go on to air UFC's competitor in Bellator for a number of years. And then I remember Zain getting, I don't know, maybe shell-shocked is the right word, when the UFC announced its deal with Fox. Like, oh my God, the UFC is actually getting some mainstream attention.
That's for sure. Do you remember vividly the first pay-per-view you ever purchased?
Yes. UFC 116.
Wow. That's a good one.
Of all the things that it could be my first UFC pay-per-view. You know, obviously it took a while because it was still a few years. I would just watch the Spike TV fight nights and the prelims whenever they were actually on in the later years. But to actually watch UFC 116, in front of a television, I was just hooked. And then obviously Zain, the first actual UFC that I ever watched was obviously the Ultimate Fighter 1 finale, where I got to bear witness, 10-year-old me, to the beauty that we know today as Forrest Griffin versus Stephan Bonner 1.
So you watched it live?
Yes. That hooked me.
And do you remember just vividly watching it going, this is the greatest thing. This is the greatest.
Yes, absolutely. And then it remained my undisputed favorite fight up until it was challenged by Rory McDonald and Robbie Lawler 2 at UFC 189.
Wow, that's a good one. Well, my similar story to that is I can vividly remember where I was when Shogun Huo fought Dan Henderson the first time in San Jose. I was sitting in a private room at a Champ Sports Bar. We're no longer around my area anymore, but Champ Sports Bar was packed with like hundreds of people and stuff. And I just remember that fight was crazy. And then my favorite fight took the cake when Jones fought Gustafsson for the first time. And to this day, even though it's been 10 years, that still is my favorite fight because that was the first time that I had ever seen John Jones look like he was human. This is unbelievable. Am I actually gonna watch Jones lose his first fight? Like I couldn't believe it. I'm sure boxing.
And I thought that he had lost his first fight. I definitely think in a couple of rewatches I've had since, my opinion's kind of been swayed a little bit, but at the time I thought it was a loss.
That's pretty wild to think about. So now that we're at the 30-year anniversary, Tom, have you contemplated the time when you will stop being an MMA fan, or will you always be an MMA fan until the day you leave this planet? What do you think?
I hope the latter. I hope until the day I die, I am an MMA fan. Now, obviously, we reflect and we think back, Zain, the Gladiator intro, all the new metal, and we talk about the good old days, and people can look at us and scratch our heads and say, what the are you guys talking about? And say that new metal sucks and everything, but
we're serious.
Yeah, but it's like that was, as you kind of alluded to, Zain, that was our first hook into the sport. So we'll never forget that. We'll never forget those times. And, it's been a wild, crazy road. And I never thought that I was going to, do MMA media. I had always thought for a while I would be doing baseball or hockey or something like that. No, I somehow managed to stumble my way for over 7 years now in one direction or another as part of MMA media.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd ever get into MMA media either, but here I am almost 5 years later and I'm still doing it. It's just one of those things where I wanted to start doing it as a hobby. I didn't actually think that people actually did it. Like that was the thing that they did. So to see how easy it is that there's no barrier to entry to covering any of this stuff is pretty mind-boggling. And for those of you who don't know, Tom and I are actually part of a pretty exclusive MMA media group chat, and seeing how many new people that have gotten into the sport in the last 2 to 3 years, mixed in with a bunch of old guys that have been watching it forever. It's one of those sports where no matter when you start watching it, it's always one of those things where you could be a fan for 3 weeks and start debating and end up having better debates than the people who have watched the sport forever. It's pretty crazy. You really can't do that with other sports, and I'm just dreaming of the day that somehow, some way, the right fight comes around for the UFC where we get a major championship fight on free television, either in a football stadium, like an NFL football stadium, or a baseball stadium. That's when I'll know that the UFC has made it.
Yeah, I think, Zain, I hope for the day that, we talk about the UFC, we talk about Cowboy Stadium, the EA Sports MMA game, the one without the UFC, had Cowboy Stadium as an actual venue. And I just wonder, Zain, if we can ever get to those days, where we have the UFC at a big stadium like Cowboy Stadium or another NFL stadium or something like that. I think that would take the cake.
For sure.
All right, we're going to keep things moving because we are a little bit over time here, so we got to keep things moving. Let's get into some other news stories, Zain, to take track of. So Dana White unleashed a big announcement yesterday in which he has basically revealed the opening quarter one schedule for 2024, the headline bouts. It's going to be at UFC 297, January 20th in Toronto, Canada. Sean Strickland versus my man, Dricus du Plessis, for the middleweight championship. So I guess, Zain, with Khamzat Chimaev on the shelf right now with his broken hand and Israel Adesanya taking time away, the UFC and Dana, the hands tied behind the back, basically.
Yeah, and you're definitely excited for that fight. I'm excited for it, and you better believe that du Plessis licking his chops he's been waiting for this for a long time now.
Could you imagine what the press conferences are going to be with Strickland and DDP?
Oh, it's going to be. You want to talk about some very explicit stuff? That's going to be as explicit as you could possibly. That could get ugly in a hurry.
For sure,
that could get bad.
Yeah. Also worth mentioning, by the way, to get off of this banner for a little bit, but since we already had it planned, 297, the co-main event, Raquel Pennington, Mayra Bueno Silva. The winner of this fight will be the new UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion. This comes, of course, following the retirement of Amanda Nunes.
Yeah, and I guess whoever wins this fight punches their ticket to fighting Juliana Pena. So
I was just going to say, it's kind of funny. Juliana Pena was talking all that trash after Amanda Nunes retired, saying, avoiding the trilogy and all that. And she's not even in the fight for the vacant title.
It's pretty wild to think about, but that's the way the sport rolls sometimes. And the UFC is going to just have to deal with it because that's the business that they're in. If you haven't noticed, there's been more shakeups in the last 3 months for title fights than there has been all year or so. Hopefully this doesn't become a new trend and ruins other fights that they have down the line planned for 24 and alters the whole schedule. Or at least
yeah, I hope. For sure. Zain, wait, are you saying then...
1,000% I am. Yep.
Also, just to go back to that other banner, by the way. So, Volkanovski-Topuria. It is still going to happen according to Dana White. It just will not happen at 297. It'll happen in February at UFC 298. I don't think there was a confirmed date, Zain, so I don't know if it's confirmed if it'll be Super Bowl weekend or not. I would assume, based on the last couple of years, I would assume that it still is.
That's what Dana wants it to be. And what he wants to do is he wants to hold a power slap event the night before and he wants to do a UFC event the night after. What we don't know is will 298 be in Vegas or will it be somewhere else?
Okay. So, Ilia Topuria, right before we started recording, Zain, put out a video promo. And in that video promo, he seems to, leak or unofficially say or tease that it's going to be, it won't be Las Vegas with the craziest Super Bowl like we talked about, but it'll be right nearby, one state over in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. You might see a lot of people's travel plans be altered, but in a good way, because the people that can afford it will probably want to go to LA the night before the Super Bowl and then go to the Super Bowl the next day. So you never know.
Yeah. Do you think it's a little risky for Volkanovski? Just 4 months, maybe even 3.5 months after getting head kicked, knocked out, that he's going to jump in there and defend the title?
Yeah, I honestly think he should have waited until 300. I think this is a mistake.
Yeah, I think this is a big opening for Topuria to capture the championship.
Where do you think O'Malley versus Vera is going to be?
I have heard just, on the MMA chattersphere with MMA media people, I've heard it could be. I know they mentioned Vegas at one point, but I don't think so, considering 300. I've heard potentially Phoenix.
Yeah, Phoenix would be a good one, considering...
That would be insane, Zain. Sorry, that would be insane from February to April, 298 to 300, all within the Southwest U.S.
Yeah, I don't know if the UFC's ever had that before, but that would definitely be very unique. But I'm going to say early predictions for these fights. Duplessis by stoppage over Strickland. I think Volk barely edges Topuria, and I actually think that Vera is going to knock out O'Malley and become the new UFC Bantamweight champion.
Oh my God! Wow.
Yeah, he's gonna. Okay. I think he's gonna turn the weights out and do the old Dan Henderson H bomb on the way down to just to do it for good measure, right in front of Steven Steiny in the front row too, so they could go home crying about it.
My early prediction is Zain. You would be mistaken if I'm not on the DDP hype train for his title fight, especially against Strickland, who pulled off a massive upset. Give me DDP, first or second round finish.
Okay.
I want to say Volk, but like I said, this is a big opening for Topuria because I don't know. That's a short, quicker turnaround for Volk after getting knocked out. I understand, his emotional, what's it called? His emotional conversation with the media following his knockout loss about needing to just constantly be in the cage, but I think it's a risk. I think it's a really bad risk. I'll go Volk for now, but don't be surprised if by January my mood might shift a little bit. I would love to see Vera get that knockout, like you were saying, Sam. I kind of really want to see that, but I feel like O'Malley will have an adjusted game plan ready for Vera to retain the title.
My pick could change too, but that's my way too early prediction. Is considering the fight was announced less than 24 hours ago. So
fair enough. I guess this leaves the openings, and by the way, for something we talked about in the last couple of weeks, that if O'Malley's not going to be part of 300, then we can hopefully assume Conor Chandler headlines 300, and then maybe kind of what you were referring to before, especially considering what Ali said on social media about Islam not fighting till March, that maybe Islam Makhachev Charles Oliveira 2 takes place on UFC 300, either as a co-main event or, knock on wood, if Conor Chandler F's up again, that is the main event.
Yeah, the only thing I'd worry about is how ugly the press conference could get if Conor and Chandler and Islam are in the same room.
Well, I said that last week, and you did, or 2 weeks ago, and you didn't seem to have a qualm about it.
Now that now that it's playing out in the way that it's playing out, I'm starting to think like, oh, that could be worst case scenario. We might get into a UFC 279 situation again. But
I mean, fair enough. But again, then what else do you have going for you with all these title fight announcements?
You don't really have much unless they made O'Malley versus Vera, already knowing that the Conor Chandler fight is essentially a done deal minus the 6 months. Do you think that that's a possibility too, that they know that, like,
it would have to be. It would have to be, because otherwise, I kind of alluded to this in our previous conversation, Zan. I don't know how you do otherwise UFC 300 without O'Malley, the guy you're trying to build as the biggest star in the sport right now.
You can't. Unless you're hoping DDP wins and he takes a quick turnaround and they convince Adesanya to come back for UFC 300 and they do DDP versus Adesanya for the title at UFC 300.
That's a possibility too. A lot that's got to be played around, a lot to talk about. Zan, let's break from UFC right now, go into the boxing world. A lot of controversy, a lot of talk about this Fury and Ngannou fight. According to reports, only did 10,000 pay-per-view buys in the traditional television format. Meanwhile, 56,000 buys and streams in the US on the ESPN Plus. No numbers currently available for either the worldwide DAZN purchases or the UK exclusive TNT purchases.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say this. I think it's really concerning considering how heavily marketed this fight was from a social media perspective. I felt like it got more traction across all the social media platforms than it did linear TV, which I think is a problem. Also, a second factor into this was you had to think about the week that I know this isn't a football show, but for those of you who are college football fans, you have to know that the weekend of October 28th, that a lot of marquee games, one of them being Ohio State versus Penn State, which aired at the same time of this pay-per-view beginning. So that must have had a negative effect too in terms of the people who watched it. And then also the start time. You have to think this fight was made with an afternoon start time to accommodate the UAE audience. I think if it aired at a traditional pay-per-view start time, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, something like that, I don't think you run into these same issues. And even though it looks like a flop on pay-per-view, at the very least, the fight delivered. maybe the numbers of who saw it just don't reflect it. And I think those things are going to happen when you try to make these exotic fights in these countries that people aren't just going to easily flock to. If this fight was done in the UK or in America, it's a different story.
I could see that. I definitely could see that, Zain. My other thing is, here's the other issue to that, and I want to give credit to, I think it was Luke Thomas, because I think it was the Showtime MMA crew who talked about it. Do you really think they really care about the pay-per-view buys, though? Could you just think of the pure payday that Ngannou got on base alone? And I think the pay-per-view buys, and you're right, are concerning, but you consider the fact how much Saudi Arabia paid these guys just to hold the fight there. Like, they talk about, Zain, when it comes to Saudi Arabia, the term sports washing is now the big word. Trying to basically show their power, show their wealth, and influence through sports. Obviously, they talked about one of the guys who were celebrities who was there at the fight, Zain, was Cristiano Ronaldo. Look where he is right now, playing for a Saudi Arabian team. Vince McMahon was there. The WWE just had Crown Jewel, one of its events in Saudi Arabia, and its long-term deal. Zain, Dana White just apparently said at some point during the day we're recording this that the UFC's deal for Saudi Arabia, how they're going to have the first event in March?
Mm-hmm.
Helped head that. Vince McMahon.
Wow.
So, as much as the pay-per-view buys can be a concern and throw some questions about Ngannou's ability to be a star on his own, I don't know if he necessarily cares, because if he's just going to get, and that also includes the start times for these things, because if he's just going to get payday after payday from Saudi Arabia taking some boxing fights, I don't know if he cares.
No, he doesn't.
I don't know if he should care.
Why should he? He's the biggest star that the UFC heavyweight division has ever had in terms of marketability. He's the most freak athlete you've ever seen. He has punching power that's the same power as a Ford Escort, going as fast as it can. He has nothing to worry about right now other than just enjoying life and picking up payday after payday, because he's done everything he needs to do to deserve it.
Yeah. So, is this a little bit of a concern? Yes. I know Ariel Helwani has been promoting to all hell that we got to wait and see the international numbers. And he's another story.
He is, which we won't get into, but let's just say this. It's very interesting to see what the current state of MMA media is, because you have one side of MMA media that will tell it to you like it is, and then you have another side of MMA media, no names mentioned, that will try to hide behind every narrative they can to get their point across, and 50% of the time it works, and the other 50% of the time it doesn't. That's all I can say. So,
fair enough. So, actually, let me bring up why I bring up Saudi Arabia and taking other boxing fights. Obviously, we talked about that last week, Zain. That was one of our talking points coming out of Fury and Ngannou. But there's also, Zain, this now rumor, which was mentioned by Boxing Kingdom on social media, which, Zain, you have been a follower for a long time, and he is insanely credible in your books. You said he is rarely ever wrong. And he's
not wrong. He's actually followed me for quite some time too, which is something that's very interesting.
But Zain, there is also some credibility in the MMA side, because this was also mentioned, I think, in a recent podcast from Michael Bisping, that apparently, let me try to break this down for those who are understanding or confused. So there's this whole conversation about what was going to happen with Fury and Usyk. So it seems like Fury Usyk, I don't know if we touched on it last week, that it's now going to be in February. That seems to be where this is. Apparently, Saudi Arabia is saying, well, we have a date scheduled for December 23rd, and we want to keep things moving. And now the rumor is that they're going to offer Francis Ngannou another payday to fly back to Saudi Arabia and compete in a quick turnaround on December 23rd. I know Boxing Kingdom mentioned Derek Chisora as a possible opponent. I think some of the other rumor mills and other names on the rumor mill, Joseph Parker, who got a win on the Ngannou versus Fury card, and Zain are also potential opponents.
Yeah, I mean, all of those options would be suitable options. It's just a matter of can Francis Ngannou afford that quick of a turnaround, considering how competitive the Fury fight was. I'm not sure, but if he's 100%, then I really see no issue with. The only thing I see an issue with is the date, obviously, being a bit of a concern. But Derek Chisora is a very formidable matchup. He's on the downside of his career as it is. This could be a coming out party win for Francis. And obviously, I wrote about it a week ago for BJ Penn. Eddie Hearn wants to see Francis Ngannou versus Anthony Joshua. He says in his words that would be absolutely massive. And I think it would. And him getting a win over Chisora could easily set that fight up to be one of the biggest fights of 2024. And really, I think no matter what Francis decides to do, every business decision is good at this point. When you have the Saudis backing him, he can, in their eyes, he can do no wrong, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely see that. All right, Zain, let's quickly, as we finish up here, obviously we had Sao Paulo last weekend for the UFC. Zain, I tapped out of this. I tapped out of this. Oh my God, this was bad.
Yeah, this was a bad fight, and I was contemplating taking this fight to go the distance at plus 1,200, and now I regret doing it. It just had that kind of vibe with how weird the card was, and Almeida did what he needed to do, and honestly, at this point, a win's a win, and with how transitional the heavyweight division is becoming, it leaves you concerned considering that Almeida, in some people's eyes, they thought that he was going to easily finish Derek Lewis, and he couldn't do it. And did you notice in round 3, I kind of hinted at it last week?
They were both gas.
They were both gassed, and there was a glimmer of hope for Derek Lewis. And you could tell, like, oh my goodness, he's going to do this.
You had Derek Lewis, who was unable to figure out Almeida's grappling game, and then you had Almeida. Did he know how to throw a punch in the mount?
No, he didn't. Yeah,
oh my God!
This was a stain for the heavyweight division if we've ever seen. When it really was that was supposed to be a high octane, action packed fight, and it almost leads you to believe that Curtis Blades should have been in there, because it might have actually been a more competitive fight if he was in there.
It would have been a pure grappling versus grappling matchup. It would have definitely been an entertaining kind of fight. And Zain, you want to talk about Zain. Also, what happened, after we finished recording, we find this out. Derek Lewis was arrested about a week and a half before UFC, Paulo, for speeding.
Yeah, but according to Derek Lewis, because of course in Derek Lewis fashion, he has to say it, he claimed that they caught the wrong guy, that it wasn't him. So
doing the Shaggy defense.
But
you know the reference I'm making, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You just didn't say anything. You got me concerned. You didn't know the song.
No, I know. No, I know. I know the song. It may have just taken me a second to reference what you were saying.
Wasn't me. Good Lord. All right. Let's end on a little something happier, Zain, because I know you love Callum Walsh, and he's going to be fighting as part of this MSG Hype Fight Week.
Yeah, I've been on the Callum Walsh hype train ever since his UFC Fight Pass debut. For those of you who don't know who he is, you can look at my story on bjpenn.com, where I talk all about his relationship with Freddie Roach, how he has tremendous support from the UFC and Dana White. And he's fighting Ismail, who actually is just as good of a prospect as he is. These are both super lightweight prospects, if I'm almost not mistaken. So that leads me to my question, Tom. With the way the UFC has continued to build Callum Walsh over the last, let's call it 9 or 10 months now. Even though Dana doesn't want me to admit it, is this putting the wheels in motion for, I hate to say it, but Callum Walsh being the poster boy to a potential Zuffa boxing?
Zuffa boxing?
or am I crazy?
I mean, Zain, if Dana had it his way, don't you think he'd be doing Zuffa boxing by now?
Of course.
It's been 6 years. I think I'm ready to let that horse die.
Yeah, I think so too. What do you think makes Dana support this kid so much, and for good and for good reason? He's a very marketable kid.
Oh, he's great, Zain. He's great. I guess because with UFC Fight Pass, Zain, the thing that's attractable is that it's not just MMA. There's boxing on there. There's kickboxing on there. There's jiu-jitsu, submission grappling. And I think maybe he wants a face for each of those different disciplines. And I guess Callum Walsh will be the face of Fight Pass boxing.
Yeah, I think so too. Are you excited for this fight? And do you think he wins? What do you think?
I think he definitely wins. If I have nothing to do, because I think this Thursday night football matchup this week isn't exactly great. No offense.
I know.
I'm in the same boat as you with my team, so don't worry.
I know. At least I have a good excuse as to why I may not finish the Bears game is because of this fight. So you never know. But
Fair enough.
But for those of you who aren't doing anything and who are in the area, Callum Walsh is fighting this week at the Hulu Theater at Madison Square Garden. Tickets are still available. And no, I am not a promoter for Tom Wofford, but I can say that I am a very huge fan of what he's doing with 360 Boxing Promotions, and if done the right way, could be a major player as Showtime gets out of the business of officially next year. But that's essentially all we have for this week on episode 60, the MMA Outsiders. A very packed episode. As always, sorry we went a little bit over to our old school time a little bit, but you have to do what you have to do sometimes. So be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network across social media at ETB Network. You can follow the MMA Outsiders at MMA Outsiders ETB on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Zain Bando. I'm a staff writer for BJPen.com and the newest Sunday news writer to MMA Knockout, part of the Fan Nation Sports Illustrated umbrella. So you can catch all of my post-fight happenings every Sunday over there. And to my right is my longtime co-host, Tom Albano. You can find his work over at Fansided MMA. He's a longtime contributor there. And, of course, you can also find his work during PFL season, contributing for the PFL's website. And he will have a busy end of the year ahead with all of that, including the PFL finals from Washington, D.C. on Black Friday. So for myself, Zain Bando, that's Tom Albano to my right. This has been a production of the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. This has been episode 60, and we will see you right back here for episode 61, where we will preview the final Bellator card under the Viacom banner, which I will be going to Bellator 301.
Considering we haven't had an official word from either promotion yet, it still might be the final Bellator ever.
You never know. You never know. Hopefully, with me going there, I'll have more information in the coming days on that. But until then, we will see you guys next Tuesday morning, same time, same place, episode 61. And next week, as we get into the middle part of November, and before you know it, it'll be December and almost time for the end of the year. So stay along for the ride.
For sure. And B. Joe Piper. Yes, I know the card is in New York this weekend, but this will be the time I show Philly some love.
Yeah, for sure. Show Philly some love. B. Joe Piper. Enjoy the fights. Good luck with your bets, and we will see you all next week.
Take care, all.
Take care.